next 45 minutes, I think for 20 minutes, I would like just to cover what's happening in the enterprise AI environment. And then for the next 25 minutes, we're fortunate to have Daniel Saxton here from Frontier. And just to have a discussion on, sorry, is the mic okay? Okay. Just to have a discussion on his experience implementing AI, getting data in, where to get data from. So just some practical experience of what's happening in the market. So if you're wondering about my accent, I'm South African born and bred. So English is a distant second language. So basically, I just want to touch on what makes AI agents special. Right, so there's so much talk about agents, but not really, people aren't really speaking about what constitutes an AI agent. And then also I want to touch on AI agents needing to live in our world, what that means. What's next, the AI agent platform, and a quick look at models. You know, a few years back, I was the product manager for a voice bot at Vodafone. And we trained our NLU model on a daily basis. And we trained our acoustic model for the speech recognition on a weekly basis. That was just the cadence we followed. And we had a test procedure. And I find it curious that no one is speaking about model fine-tuning. And I don't see myself as I'm not a classically trained data scientist, but I experiment, collect data, train models, test it. And it's surprisingly simple. So I just want to touch on models, and I think within a year or two, people will start training models on typically a weekly cadence. I always start with this slide. It's something I try and update as we go along. You know, so I see language models in Zone 1 as really a pebble that was dropped into this pond. And there's these concentric circles going out with different impacts, you know, on the market. Zone 4, it's interesting, 2 years back, people thought Zone 4 would be dominated by OpenAI. And everyone thought they've captured the market, it's done. And we've really seen quite a few models being introduced into Zone 4. I think what excites me most are two things. The one thing is purpose-built models. So you might have heard of large action models. There's a whole family of action models that's been developed and trained and open sourced. And action models are specifically intended for use in AI agents, right, to take action. Something else that excites me in Zone 4 is the small language models. Right, so there's a certain thrill of running a small language model locally on your machine, and developers make use of that. And something you heard quite frequently during the sessions is Core's platform being you know, cloud agnostic, but also model agnostic. And what excites me about that is the fact that I think models will just become an utility. And you'll see, if you look at Zone 6, that's really the functionality, you know, and you'll see more and more model companies like OpenAI, Anthropic, releasing SDKs. So they releasing, you know, software development kits, trying to get into the development world, because I believe they realize that models are just utilities like gas or electricity, and you know, people want to be model agnostic and swap models out. So you'll see that whole notion of them trying to capture the market. Just to mention something else around models, something I saw with the model providers, they're really neglecting the developer ecosystem, and they're focusing on distribution. So you'll see, obviously, DeepSeek, OpenAI, xAI with Grok, they're focusing on applications, and they want their application on the user's handset. And the main reason for that is the race is on for answers, right? So we've got search as we know it, and the next step is answers, or search 2.0. And because currently search is broken, you search for something, you get a whole list of links. Some are SEO optimized, some are sponsored. You've got to go through those links and you've got to curate the information and synthesize your own information. And obviously with deep search and deep research, these applications living on your phone, you can ask complex questions and it does that for you and synthesizes the information for you. So there's this whole race for distribution and getting critical mass, those applications out. And I read a blog of OpenAI where they said we are neglecting our developer community. We're trying to address it. But what they didn't mention is the reason for that is this race to get distribution and live and gain that critical mass to live on handsets and rule search. Zone 6, there's a problem of fragmentation, right? So all of these things you'll recognize, and vendors and companies are focusing on specific elements in Zone 6. That causes fragmentation in the market, and I think there's a whole opportunity for unified enterprise AI. And I'm not a salesperson, but I think that's the opportunity we're trying to capture as core. Saying we've got a unified platform, we're bringing all of this together. Orchestration is a big problem, and I think that's the missing piece currently. Zone 6, Zone 7 I find interesting. I always compare that to the flashlight app on an iPhone. There were companies making a living on selling the flashlight app and advertising, and all of a sudden it became standard in iOS and their business was wiped out, superseded. And in Zone 7, especially a year ago, less so now, but so many companies created an application that was just a thin layer of IP wrapper around a model. And many of these companies were superseded by standard functionality included in the models. So I think the market opportunity from an enterprise perspective and the challenge is in Zone 6 in having an environment where you can orchestrate all these different functionalities. This is just a diagram laying out the difference between the old search and the new search. So what makes AI agents special? For me, the litmus test of an AI agent is the ability to take any complex and compound user input, decompose that into a sequence of steps, and then solve it in a stepwise fashion. That for me is the litmus test for AI agents. So looking at the first line, if I say I saw Roberto with binoculars, that's truly ambiguous, right? Did I see him wearing binoculars around his neck, or did I see him looking through binoculars? So that's why context is really important, right? So some utterances is really ambiguous. You don't know what is meant, so you need to get more context. So context remains important for AI agents. RAG is just a way of creating context for the conversation. Something I love, traditional chatbots would never have been able to distinguish between the two sentences, I dropped my phone in water, or there's a drop of water on my phone, right? That is, for us as humans, easy to solve, but for a traditional chatbot, that would have been impossible. But if you ask any language model, it would say, well, the first sentence is an event of high consequence, and the second one is really just a minor incident. So that's the nuances you can pick up with any conversational user interface where the back end is a language model. And this is my litmus test for any AI agent, right? So if you've got an AI agent that's got the ability to search the web and have access to the math library, I like to ask the question, what's the square root of the year of birth of the person commonly regarded as the father of the iPhone? That's a difficult question. For us as humans, we know how to decipher and solve for that. And this is just basically an open source AI agent I ran in a notebook. And it was the first thing it did, it was to invert the question. Because you cannot start with the square root, with the year of birth. You've got to start with the iPhone and who's seen as the creator of the iPhone. And if you look at the fine print, the output, the first thing the AI agent does, it inverts the question and says, I need to find out who is regarded as the father of the iPhone and his year of birth, then I will calculate the square root of his year of birth. That's the output from the AI agent. And then it goes into the process of searching, right, and establishing, well, it's Steve Jobs most probably. This is his year of birth, 1955. This is the square root. And you can see it goes through a process of action, observation, thought, action, observation, thought, until it reaches the final answer. And that is the beauty of AI agents, the ability to take a complex query, decompose it, create a sequence of events, and solve it. And this is my acid test. If the agent can't do that, then it's not an agent. The application, agentic applications need to live somewhere. So you will see I've got at the top, human in the loop, Web Explorer, Weather API. The AI agent needs to be connected to the outside world to be able to be effective. So it needs to be able to search the web. It needs to be able to navigate your computer desktop. It needs to be able to reach out to a human and ping a human and say, what's the answer to this question to continue? And again, this is just breaking down the whole sequence of evaluation, memory, one of N actions. It steps through observation, thought, and reaching the final answer. Something I find very interesting, right? So if you look at the top graph approach, that's how we all know chatbots, right? So it's a graph approach. You have nodes, you've got decision points. It's cast in stone. It's set. It's also, you can call it a RPA approach. Then we went to the AI agent approach, where you really have this sequence of events being internalized within the agent. And something happened of late, and it's something you can call agentic workflows. And what agentic workflows is that people started saying, well, we've got fixed flows, graph data, number one. We've got the agentic approach, but that's a little bit scary because, you know, we don't trust the agents. But why don't we give the agent the instruction, get this sequence of events, the plan, the output, review that, and then implement it. And agentic workflows is something you see more and more of late because there's a high level of supervision. So I'll give you an example. OpenAI had a project where they went to a company and they got all the documentation, you know, all the training documentation for live call center agents, service representatives. And then they got all the questions that customers phoning in asked the call center. And they said to the AI agent, this is the corpus of information. These are all the questions that's being asked. Give me the most optimal path to solve these problems. And the AI agent went off and it created the graph output. For this problem, you start here. This is the most optimal sequence of events, and this is the end. And obviously, we've got a product we call agentic workflows, and that's just an exceptional way of optimizing a way of work by using an AI agent as a tool, and there's no risk involved in that. This is a typical example of a desktop personal assistant where the user says, I want to take paid time off, and the agent comes back and creates a workflow, an agentic workflow, a sequence of events the person can follow to book some time off. Just touching on the fact that agents need to live in our world, right? So if you look at the studies, there's lots of talk about embodiment. So the future is that AI agents will be the OS, the operating system of embodied robots. So that can be a humanoid, it can be a vehicle, it can be a vacuum cleaner, an appliance. With Core, I spent some time in Milan with one of our partners that's building agents into appliances, Italian company, into stoves, into fridges, washing machines. So that's a type of embodiment. But the first step where we find ourselves now is that agents live in our digital worlds. So the two main areas where they live, they can navigate web browsers. So they can, receive a task, realize I can solve this task by browsing the web, and it automatically browses the web. Or the other option is navigating a computer operating system. So navigating your desktop. So you'll see, and you see the model providers also focusing on that to be able to navigate the digital environments, the browser, which is the easier part. The operating system is more difficult. And eventually that will branch out into physical embodiments like maybe appliances. There we go. So this is just an example of this was an open source project I ran on my laptop, and I asked it to compare the prices between GPT-4o and I think some other model. And you can see how it went about. It opened my browser, it typed in the query, and you can see the bounding boxes, right? So all the text that's relevant, all the places it can click, it defined with coordinates, and it gave it numbers. So this is a typical way the AI agent will navigate the web. And it's kind of eerie when you install this agent, you run it, and it goes off, open your browser, starts typing, and starts navigating. But that's just an example of web browsing. The question, what's next? So top left, reactive agents. This is music, video, image. It's nice to play with. Generative art, it's nice to play with, but it's got limited depth. So if you create a video of something, and I want the lighting to be a bit higher in the one corner, I want to change the t-shirt of someone in the background. You can't really do that, right, with the AI. So it's nice to create music and video, but it's not that easy to have that depth of have a granular, fine-grained approach. Then I think the next step is assistive agents, where you have an agent that's assisting you typically on your desktop, and that's an easy step forward, I think, especially for an enterprise. There's quite a few of our customers in the financial industry. Obviously, their employees cannot have ChatGPT or Grok running on their desktop, so they need to give them an enterprise alternative, a bespoke enterprise alternative, and that's where we come in. So to have like a assistive agent where you can ask it questions, it can retrieve and synthesize that information for you, but it adheres to all the data governance, all the policies of the organization, and the flow of data is controlled. Then the next step up I will call collaborative agents, where the human and the agent work together. And then the last step would be fully autonomous agents, and I think too many people focus on that, and hence the fear and the apprehension. But I like this whole step from assistive agents to collaborative agents to advanced autonomous agents. That's a logical progression, and I think for any enterprise, that's the progression one needs to focus on. Just basically, I'm not going to go into this into detail, but basically, task classification is very important for AI agents within an enterprise. So it's the capability of the AI agent, but it's the classification of the tasks, the use cases. This is something I adapted from a study from Hugging Face, and again, they looked at agentic levels. So within Core, we often speak about agentic spectrum, the agentic continuum, and it's different levels of agency that can be introduced depending on the functionality that's available to you, and also what the specific use case is. And there's the different levels of agency. So you can go basically from RPA fixed prompts all the way to a fully autonomous AI agent. And this first section is drawing to a close, but I think it's really important. And I'm more than happy to share the slides, but I think it's really important for any enterprise to have that differentiation between what level of autonomy they want to apply and what the use case is. Just basically, this is what the user interface looks like of our agent builder. It's a no-code approach to low-code, a very intuitive way of building applications. I just want to quickly touch on model distillation. I think that will be the first step into fine-tuning, where you distill a model, you take only the part you use, that small part you use in a large language model, and to replicate that part of use on a small language model. And we've got a no-code approach to doing that, where basically anyone that knows their data can perform that. But I think that will be the first step people take into replicating that use onto a small language model. That, there's a new paradigm. I don't know, not sure what to call it. We always had UX, user experience. Now we've got artificial intelligence experience, how people experience AI, and also developer experience. And I think the challenge is to bring all three of those together. And it's my pleasure now to welcome Daniel. Is it on?
So, as Cobus was saying, I work for Frontier Communications, lead the chatbot and our SMS work at Frontier. Been doing it for the last 2 years. Just high level, from a chatbot perspective, I came in 2023. We were about 8% self-service. When I left work last week, we were right around 62% self-service. Huge strides. It's involved in, Search AI from Core's platform, Gen AI in multiple spaces now. In fact, and hopefully that'll be one of the questions I can kind of share a little bit about how Gen AI has kind of transformed and really started moving us further ahead than I think we even thought it would. But really solid progress, really great partnership with Core.
Daniel, I just want to double click on, you mentioned about search, just to get an understanding of how you bring the data in, because I think with a normal chatbot, search is very powerful. So just to understand the scope of search and how you use RAG and how you manage bringing the data in and what data to bring in and how to keep it up to date.
Yes. So for Frontier, we were very, very specific about the space we wanted search to crawl. Because obviously a lot of governance on ensuring that there's limited hallucinations, limited issues with how the bot responds. So we were purposeful about leveraging just our Frontier domain. But ensuring, working with our CX folks, that the content that's out there makes sense. It's written in a way that when a response is given, it's educational, it gives the customer insight and understanding as to how to solve their problem and get the help they need. So we've been very purposeful about that, but we are constantly re-looking at the data and those pages to ensure our responses are as good as they possibly can be.
So do you primarily take from your public corpus, like the website, and ingest that into search?
Yes. In fact, we recrawl every week to ensure we have the most recent information, because initially we were holding off every 2 to 3 weeks, but we saw that we were adding more content to the Frontier domain and we were missing opportunities to give better and more consistent answers to customers.
And do you foresee maybe there'll be a future next step to access other information? I know it's there's quite a bit of an element of data sanitation and making sure what you put out there?
Yes. So that's a great question. We actually are actively working now to feed customer information into that space. A little bit of nervousness around what that looks like, but one of the most common questions we see in our chatbot is customers wanting to understand, why did my bill go up? It's a good question. In fact, we have designs out there to try to answer that question. The chatbot can tell them what actually changed, but what we are doing now with search and Gen AI responses, by allowing it to consume the 2 most recent PDFs the customer had for their billing, we can tell them the why and the what. The more specific, and we're finding, because we did a lot of research to understand why were we seeing leakage from the responses the chatbot was given, and a lot of times the follow-up question the customer had was why? Why did it change? So some of the generative responses that we're seeing by allowing the bot to consume the bills itself, it's astounding how much better those responses are than we could even design for.
Tell me, Daniel, it sounds like you've got more of a stepwise, it's almost like you're transforming your chatbot. It reminds me of what I showed on the screen now, but it sounds like you're transforming your chatbot in terms of generative AI, as you mentioned, and data in a stepwise fashion.
Yes, very much. We've been very purposeful. As we hit plateaus for self-service and customer satisfaction, we started trying to investigate what was the next step. Where could we go next? How do we begin to build this out? Because our designs, we were only able to contain about, I would say, anywhere from about 45 to 50% consistently. When we introduced Search AI, initially we got about another 2 to 3% self-service, which we thought that was really good. When we layered now a generative response on top of the Search AI, we got an additional 3 to 5% lift. In fact, what we found was Search AI alone, when you looked at customer responses, we asked them, hey, did this help? We were seeing almost 70% of the customers said no. So they would continue the conversation. When we put Gen AI in place, it went from almost a flip. Now we see 68 to 70% of the customers say, yes, that did help.
So it's that level of data synthesis where it's synthesized for that specific context and use case.
Yes, and we have done a lot of work also on our prompts. So we've been very purposeful having our prompt engineers look at the prompting that we've got. We've revised it 2 or 3 times to see if we can get better responses, more accurate responses, to handle some of the insights we were seeing in the data as to how customers respond to the generative response. And we continue to see an uptick in there. And again, once we release our next one for the Gen AI tool to begin to respond to customers about their bill, I expect to see an even larger increase.
Tell me, Daniel, how did you, so obviously when there's search involved, that information is retrieved, synthesized in that context for the user. Like general conversations, other use cases, do you also generate responses, or do you still make use of kind of like a dialogue response template approach?
Yes, everything except, so let me clarify where and when Search AI kicks in today for us. So initially, our NLP tries to identify an intent in the chatbot. If NLP doesn't recognize customer utterance and doesn't identify a specific intent, it then goes back and begins to say, hey, where is this information located, or do we have an answer? If we do, it returns a response to the customer. If we don't, and we see about 2,500 utterances a day, our chatbot still doesn't recognize. And we have about I think 85 to 87% NLP recognition. So our NLP is pretty high, but there is still a large volume of customer utterances that we don't. And honestly, what we are finding too, what we're going to play with here over the next several months is, even where an intent's identified, we believe the search and generative response can be more effective than our designs we put in place too. So that is something we're going to soon, but we've been very purposeful about how we've gone about this and ensuring that, again, looking at the data, understanding how customers are responding, and consistently going back and iterating on those.
Something I find interesting with the whole hype around agentic and Gen AI, quite a few companies use the slogan "Intents are dead." There was like marketing hype, but if you read the research, there's actually more being said on intents, because intents are basically just a classification of what the user wants to achieve.
Yes, no doubt.
Yeah, so I mean, and so it's basically just a label you put on that. Do you also use like more complex intents, like sub-intents? Is there more complexity you're introducing to intents as well? Like sub-intents or trying to queue the intents, or is it basically just the first intent you detect?
We do sub-intents as well. Not as many as I think we have an opportunity to, but I think we will continue to evolve that. You're right, it gets very complex going past that first intent to try to solve really what the customer wants. Because even sometimes recognize the initial intent, you're only partially answering the customer's question, which drives more concern because our search AI doesn't interact once the initial utterance has happened. It's basically we're taking them through our design flow, hoping that we will answer the question to the best of our ability, and then asking the customer at the end, is this really what you needed? If not, we'll give you some help. But it is something we continue to investigate how we can do more and more on the sub-intent side.
I used to be the product owner or manager for a voice bot for a telco. And the biggest challenge was new products and services. I don't know if it's the same, but you know, there wasn't always communication. So a new product or a service or a package was released, and invariably the subscribers or the customers, they refer to that package vastly different than the name we gave it. And so I think the biggest challenge for us was always trying to find the wording or the intent the user describes, you know, that product or something like that.
Yeah, and in fact, the search AI tool has helped us there because we're pulling data from utterances there to go back and have our NLP analysts analyze and say, hey, is this an utterance that we should train the bot to pick up on specific intents? Because you're right. As you introduce new things to customers, you're trying to understand how are they going to respond, what's their reaction to it, what are they going to say that maybe you didn't think about. And I think the data we get from search AI has not just helped us improve experience and self-service, it's helped us understand more around what customers really want and need.
And tell me, Daniel, in terms of how do you look at containment? I know that's like a big question. I know some telcos, and don't mention anything you're not allowed or free to mention, but I know some telcos, you know, look at like a 7-day period. Some telcos look at all the channels, all the digital channels, and if a customer didn't come back on any other channel within 10 days, for instance, then they consider that as containment. Do you have like a broader digital strategy for looking at containment, or is it, how do you see containment to consider something has been resolved?
So initially, we define self-service as the customer leaves the chatbot and doesn't transfer to an agent. Now what we do, and again, we've got a lot of work to do in this space to get to what you described. What I do is on a quarterly basis, I go back and look at the last 24 to 48 hours for customers who chat with us to see how frequently they have to pick up the phone to call on what might be the same or a different intent. What we see is only 3 to 5% of the customers who chat with us end up calling in a 24 to 48 hour period after that chat's closed. Now, what we're working on and hope to have hopefully line of sight into is kind of what you described, all the digital channels, any interaction, because one, we can better understand, is the chatbot really doing what we think it's doing, or is there opportunity to close the gap even more? But also we want that context to understand how to be smarter in the conversation. If they came into the digital space, either through our app or .com, and they were on a specific page, how do I start to tee the question up when a customer comes in and just generically say, hey, how may I help you? Says, hey, I noticed you were out on our app looking at such and such. Did you need help there, or do you want something else? But trying to figure out how do we begin to get more intelligent and understand customer journey across all of our channels. So what we're about to deliver here probably in the next 2 to 3 months is the ability to understand IVR, chat, app, and .com, and we'll consume all of those to begin to determine how do we leverage it. So we've been asking for this for quite some time, but it's hopefully going to come to fruition here pretty soon.
But like you said, the ideal would be to be proactive.
Yes.
To almost, and I think that's the beauty of a messaging channel, to proactively reach out. And for instance, coming to Reimagine, my bank texted me and said, are you traveling? Just reply yes or no, just to know my card hasn't been lifted, someone is traveling with it. So it does make sense to try and be a bit more proactive.
Yes, definitely. And that's kind of what we're hoping to do. Like I mentioned, I also own the SMS space. And so what we believe we could do is taking that journey, the experience, kind of like you said, hey, identify what a customer may be getting ready to do. Try to be intelligent and be a step ahead. Think about something maybe they haven't even thought about needing help or support with. But if we've seen an issue in their area, could we reach out with an SMS message? And because we now have our chat bots sitting in our SMS space, I can potentially help with a self-service response and contain the customer there. We've got one of our intents out there that we're messing around with right now. It's quite interesting being proactive after a customer has installed to see if they need additional help or support. We send a message to them. When we first started it, we just said, hey, if you need additional help, click this link to come chat with us. And we send out, I would say, anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 of these a day. Only 18 customers ever clicked the link to come chat with us. We turned on two-way SMS and allowed them to continue the conversation. Now we're seeing anywhere from 150 to 200 a day. Customers are willing to come in and chat with us there in that space, which I thought was very insightful. And it's based off a proactive response to try to prevent that customer from potentially having to call us.
Yeah, I think that with traditionally a contact center does not want to have contact.
Right.
But I mean, being proactive, you solicit that contact, but it surprises and delights the customer. I want to ask you about like continuous improvement. So again, in my previous life, at one stage that the director would call us in, and he would have on his laptop dialogues, conversations, transcripts, and he stepped through those conversations with us on the projector, and it was harsh because you experience what the customer experienced, and we had an hour a day sitting down and reading transcripts. So I wanted to ask, how do you approach it? Because we just found at that stage that personal experience helps. So do you have a process like that where you review conversations? And if it's manual, don't be ashamed. I think that's one of the best approaches.
Yes. So we do, and yes, as you described, I would have my design team sit in there, and we would go through conversations to determine how we could improve it. What we are doing now, I've got a really good data scientist who has been able to build some reporting for us to identify those conversations and identify where we believe there's opportunities or gaps based on how customers are responding. So we can do it much quicker than we were 6 months ago. 6 months ago, we were manually going through
almost out of time, but I've got 2 questions I really want to ask you. So, also from personal experience, something we found at this telco I was involved in was that before engineering picked up there was an outage, the customers would start chatting, and saying, I've got an outage, this break in service. So we ended up giving the engineering department access to the chatbot transcripts, a live feed, and they were looking for keywords, and that would help them find problems in the network, because the customers, experience it, and you also see the gravitas or the number of people it affects. So do you have anything like that, any collaboration you have with engineering or networking, where you share with them in real time, just to help them along, almost like crowdsourcing from your customers?
Crowdsourcing is exactly where we have gone, because when you said outages, I cringed, because I didn't work in the telecommunications industry before I came over to Frontier. I was in insurance. I knew nothing about telecommunications at all outside of just my own experience. And when I saw outages, I was like, oh my gosh, there's got to be a much better way to do this, because customers are telling us there's a problem. We've not even identified it yet. We're always behind them. So we are using crowdsourcing now. We're crawling the social media pages, because Facebook, oh my gosh, the group's already, they're telling us. So why not use it? So we are using that information now to determine if there's a potential outage. We don't necessarily classify it as an outage, but we say there could be a potential outage in your area. We're still investigating it, and that has helped tremendously reduce it, because customers just want to know you're looking into it. Yes. It's not necessarily that you've got a fix already. They just want the reassurance that you have some clue what's going on, and they're being impacted. So we found some success there early on, but man, it took a long time to get there, and a lot. Yeah, I mean, we would see our self-service go from 50% down to all the way down to like 30%. What happened? Well, we put our finger on it every time it was an outage that we had not identified, that our NOC folks had not identified and signaled that we have an outage in this area, and it's a very poor customer experience in that, because you get to an agent, the agent says, well, I don't see an outage. Well, hold on, let me do some research. Oh yeah, I think you are in an outage. It's like, how come our digital channels couldn't tell you that before you got here? But yeah, we are making tremendous progress there, and it's taken a while, but I think there'll be more crowdsourcing opportunities.
And don't comment on it, but what I found, when there's an outage, typically for the first half an hour, engineering tries and hide it, just to think it's a blip and it passes. So they weren't too pleased when customer care raised the issues, something they would hope would just blow over. Last question, Daniel. Design, and it's something we didn't speak about enough with our agents as well, but design and experience is very important. And if you just think of text, Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, text, already there's a big design difference in terms of affordances. And then voice also comes into play. So finally, I would like you just to give us an insight into how you design conversations for different text mediums, and are you at voice yet, and any considerations around design, customer experience design for that?
So I don't spend much time on the voice side at all. One of my peers does, and we will have conversations because we want our responses to be similar. We don't think they should be the exact same, because it's a different channel. Experience can be different at times, and their journey to get to that channel could have been different. So we've been purposeful about making sure our responses aren't necessarily identical, but they're in sync. But we design holistically, so we ensure that, I'll just do outages for example. So anytime we're designing for outage conversation, we bring all of our digital channel leaders and designers into a conversation, and we talk through what's the approach we want to take to ensure that we're all in sync, and that our delivery is at the same time. Because we don't want one channel to design and deliver 6 months ahead of the other channels. They all need to be in sync, because we want a customer experience that's consistent, because we find that if it's not consistent, you're going to drive more potential chat or call volume that you didn't expect or intend to do, but it's because the customer's confused now. They're getting different messaging from different channels. So we've been very purposeful about that. So design for me, we are very purposeful about how we go about designing too. Anytime we have a design, again, I'm the final sign-off on it, but it goes through our UX, our CX. We have an X18 that's customer experience. They're looking at every system that we have. So we have a very holistic sign-off process, and everyone feels like they can add to it, even if it may not be the popular thing to do, is slow something down. We ensure we get it right, and that has added, I would think, an extra level of just expectation that when we deliver something, the customer is going to get something that benefits them ultimately.
And I think it's a big part of digital hygiene as well. Old information on the website, on the chatbot to clean, and if a product ends or some promotion ends, to remove that. We're out of time. I think we could have gone on for an hour or more. But Daniel is around. I think you'll be there this evening as well. So please, speak to Daniel if you want to ask any more questions. I'm also around, and thanks for being with us. Thank you. Thanks, Daniel.